Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. The garage smelled like oil and old metal, a kind of smell that never really leaves, no matter how many times you clean. Derek liked that about it. It felt honest. Nothing pretending to be new. He stood near the workbench with his sleeves rolled up, hands dark with grease. The overhead light casting a dull yellow circle onto the concrete floor. The shop was closed for the night. No engines running, no radios playing, just the quiet hum of the light and the faint ticking sound of cooling metal. Derek was 52, a mechanic most of his life. The kind who could listen to an engine for 10 seconds and know where the problem lived. People trusted him with their cars, with their safety. They didn't know how often he questioned himself when the garage door rolled down at the end of the day. He picked up a rag and wiped his hands slowly, not trying to get them perfectly clean. Some stains stayed no matter what you did. He'd learned not to fight that. Earlier that afternoon, a customer had made an offhand comment. Nothing cruel, just careless. Something about getting older, about how long guys like you keep doing this kind of work. Derek had laughed it off. He always did. But the words had followed him into the evening, settling somewhere behind his ribs. He leaned his hip against the bench and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The garage felt different at night, less demanding, more forgiving. During the day, everything was about fixing, adjusting, restoring things to how they were supposed to be. At night, nothing asked to be repaired. Derek's eyes drifted to a block of stone sitting in the corner, half covered with a tarp. It had been there for months, a leftover from a project he never finished. He hadn't planned on keeping it. It just stayed. He walked over and pulled the tarp back. The stone was rough, uneven edges chipped. To anyone else, it probably looked like a mistake. A failed start. Something abandoned halfway through. Derek ran his hand over the surface. Cool, solid, unapologetic. Years ago, when his kids were still young, he'd taken them to a museum on a rare day off. He remembered standing in front of a sculpture, massive and calm, carved from a single block of stone. One of his kids had asked how the artist knew what it would look like before starting. The guide had smiled and said the sculpture was already there. The artist just removed what didn't belong. That line had stayed with Derek longer than he expected. At the time, he'd thought it sounded poetic. Now, standing alone in his garage, it felt uncomfortably personal. Derek thought about his own life. The things that had chipped away at him over the years, long hours, missed moments, mistakes he replayed more often than he admitted, words he wished he'd said differently, paths he hadn't taken because responsibility had come first. Sometimes it felt like life had taken a hammer to him without asking, like he'd been worn down instead of shaped. He rested his forehead briefly against the cool stone and closed his eyes. Not in defeat, just in acknowledgement. What if the years hadn't been punishing him? What if they had been revealing him? The thought didn't land easily. It pushed against something tight in his chest. Derek wasn't used to being gentle with himself. He respected effort, endurance, getting through. But gentleness had always felt like something you earned later, if at all. He stepped back and looked at the stone again, this time with different eyes. It wasn't unfinished. It was becoming. The marks on its surface told a story of pressure resistance time. None of that made it worthless. None of it meant it had failed. Derek wiped his hands again and hung the rag on a hook by the door. He turned off the overhead light, leaving only a small lamp on near the bench. The garage slipped into shadow edges, softening expectations, fading with the brightness. He sat down on an old stool and let his shoulders drop forward. The day drained out of him slowly, like oil settling after an engine shuts down. His breathing deepened without instruction. So much of his regret came from believing he should look different by now, more polished, more certain, less marked by wear. But stone doesn't apologize for its marks. It carries them as proof of process. Derek stayed there, surrounded by quiet, letting that idea exist without trying to turn it into wisdom. Just a possibility. A softer way to see the same life. The stone waited patiently in the corner, unchanged, unbothered by the hour. And for the first time in a long while, Derek didn't feel the need to fix what he was seeing. Derek stayed on the stool longer than he expected. The small lamp cast a low amber light across the garage, turning sharp edges into softer shapes. The stone in the corner no longer looked heavy. It simply looked present, as if it had always belonged there. He noticed how different the space felt when nothing needed to be repaired. During the day, every sound in the garage meant something was wrong. At night, the quiet meant things were allowed to rest exactly as they were. Derek leaned back slightly and let his hands rest on his thighs. The grease under his nails no longer bothered him. It felt like evidence, not dirt. proof of a life spent working, showing up, doing what needed to be done, even when it wasn't glamorous. For years he had carried the belief that wear meant decline, that every mark on his body, every line on his face, every regret in his memory was a sign that something had gone off course. But the stone didn't see it that way. It had been shaped by pressure, not ruined by it. The thought settled in him slowly, without resistance. He didn't need to rewrite his past. He didn't need to forgive himself all at once. He only needed to stop treating his own history like a failure. Derek stood up and walked back to the stone, placing both hands on its surface again. He didn't imagine a finished form inside it. He didn't plan a next step. He simply felt the cool weight beneath his palms and let that be enough. Life, he realized, wasn't a process of becoming someone else. It was a process of uncovering what had been there from the beginning, beneath expectations, mistakes, and years of trying to be useful. He covered the stone again with the tarp, not to hide it, but to let it wait. Some things didn't need to be rushed into completion. Some things were allowed to remain unfinished for a while longer. Derek turned off the lamp and closed the garage door behind him. The click of the lock echoed briefly, then disappeared into the night. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. The street was quiet the way it gets when most people have gone to bed. As he walked toward the house, his steps felt heavier in a good way, grounded. The ache in his back didn't vanish, but it didn't feel like an enemy either. It was simply part of the body that had carried him this far. Inside, he washed his hands at the sink, watching the water darken and then clear again. He didn't scrub hard. He let the oil lift gradually, leaving faint traces behind. Not everything had to be erased. He turned off the kitchen light and made his way to the bedroom, letting the house stay dim. The bed welcomed him without ceremony. He lay down and let his arms fall where they did, chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm. The image of the stone returned once more, not as a metaphor, but as a feeling. Solid, patient, shaped by time, not broken by it. Derek felt his thoughts slow, then thin. The regrets that usually circled at night didn't find much to hold on to. There was nothing to fix right now, nothing to prove, nothing to correct. Somewhere between one breath and the next, a quiet understanding settled in. Life hadn't been trying to destroy him. It had been working with what was there, removing what didn't belong, revealing what did. The sculptor doesn't create the stone. He listens to it. Derek listened now to his own body, to the quiet of the house, to the simple fact of being here. The day loosened its grip. The years softened around the edges. And in the dark, with no tools in his hands and no expectations pressing in, he allowed himself to rest as he was already shaped, already enough, still becoming. The hotel room was quiet in the particular way only hotel rooms are. Not truly silent, but padded. The air conditioner hummed steadily, a low, even sound that felt like it was holding the room together. Ava lay on the bed with one arm draped over her stomach, the other resting along her side, still in her work clothes, shoes kicked off near the door where they had landed. She had arrived less than an hour ago, but the sense of dislocation had already settled in. Different city, same carpet, same heavy curtains, same faint smell of detergent and recycled air. Ava had learned to recognize that feeling early in her career, the sense of being everywhere and nowhere at once. She was 29 and worked as a flight attendant. From the outside, it sounded glamorous. Travel, movement, a life that didn't sit still long enough to get boring. People often said they were jealous. Ava smiled when they did. It was easier than explaining the parts that didn't show up in photos. Tonight's flight had been smooth. Short conversations, polite passengers, nothing memorable. And yet, as soon as she closed the hotel door behind her, the quiet had pressed in heavier than expected. Ava rolled onto her side and stared at the thin strip of light leaking around the curtain. Somewhere beyond it, a city she barely knew was going about its evening. People meeting friends, people going home, people sleeping in beds that didn't change every few nights. She reached for the remote and turned the TV on, then off again almost immediately. The voices felt too close, too awake. She preferred the steady sound of the air conditioner, constant and indifferent. Ava pushed herself up and sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on her thighs. She bent forward slightly, letting her head hang for a moment long enough to feel the blood shift, long enough for the day to slide out of focus. She'd been good at moving for as long as she could remember. Good at adapting, good at smiling, and being pleasant in short bursts. But nights like this always brought the same question quietly, without accusation. Where do I actually belong? Not in a dramatic way. She wasn't lonely exactly. She had friends. She had a job she liked well enough. But sometimes, especially in hotel rooms that all looked the same, she felt like a small point of light drifting between places, never landing long enough to be named. Ava stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see out. The city below was a scatter of lights, uneven and distant. Cars moved along dark lines of road. A few buildings glowed brighter than others. No single light stood out for long. She leaned her forehead lightly against the glass and exhaled. Earlier that day, during a layover, she'd overheard a passenger talking about stars. About how some were so far away that the light reaching us now had started its journey millions of years ago. Some of those stars don't even exist anymore, the passenger had said casually. But we still see them. That idea had stayed with her. Ava looked at the lights below and thought about how often she felt small in comparison to everything else. How easy it was to believe that if she wasn't central, she must be insignificant. That if no one was looking directly at her, she might as well not be there at all. She pulled the curtain back into place and returned to the bed, sitting cross-legged, now hands resting loosely in her lap. The air conditioner clicked softly as it adjusted, then returned to its steady hum. Ava closed her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to pause. She noticed how her body felt when it wasn't bracing for the next announcement, the next boarding call, the next smile. There was a faint ache in her shoulders, a tiredness behind her eyes, and beneath that, something gentler, a quiet persistence. She thought about stars again, about how many of them we never notice. Not because they aren't shining, but because the sky is vast and our attention is limited. A star doesn't stop being a star just because it isn't named or pointed at. That thought didn't make her feel special. It made her feel allowed to be small without being meaningless, allowed to be quiet without disappearing. Ava lay back and stared at the ceiling. The room felt less foreign now, its edges softening as her breathing slowed. The air conditioner continued its steady work, filling the space with something predictable. She didn't need to decide where she belonged tonight. She didn't need to anchor herself to one place to be real. She could exist exactly as she was moving, passing through, leaving small traces of light behind her without tracking where they landed. Some stars don't guide ships. Some don't carry names. They still shine. Ava felt her eyelids grow heavy as that idea settled in her body. Not as a belief to hold on to, but as a quiet truth she didn't need to defend. The room held her gently anonymous and safe as the night deepened around the window. Ava lay still as the room continued its quiet work around her. The air conditioner hummed without change, steady and unconcerned. Outside, the city lights shifted slightly as clouds moved through the sky, softening some points of brightness while allowing others to come through more clearly. She rested one hand on her stomach and felt the gentle rise and fall of her breath. Each inhale arrived on its own. Each exhale left without being held. Her body knew how to do this part without instruction. For a long time, Ava had believed that being visible meant being valuable. That if her presence didn't register strongly, if it didn't leave an impression, it must not have mattered. That belief had followed her from place to place, quietly shaping how she saw herself during layovers, conversations, even moments of rest. But stars don't measure their worth by how many eyes find them. They don't dim themselves when no one is looking. They don't rush to become brighter than the sky around them. The thought settled in her slowly, like light spreading after dusk. Ava didn't feel grand or important. She felt relieved, as if she had been released from a task she didn't remember agreeing to. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket up and letting the weight of it ground her. The bed held her without preference. The room didn't ask for her story. It didn't need her to be interesting. Ava thought about the places she'd passed through over the years. Airports that blurred together. Hotel rooms she could barely distinguish from one another. Faces she remembered without names. All those moments had felt temporary, almost disposable, as if they didn't count because they didn't last. But nothing about a star's light is wasted. Even the faintest glow travels far beyond its origin, touching things it will never see. That idea softened something deep in her chest. Maybe her life didn't need a single fixed center to be meaningful. Maybe meaning could move with her, appearing wherever she was willing to be present, even briefly. She closed her eyes and let the darkness behind her eyelids deepen. The city outside continued without her participation. Cars moved, elevators rose and fell. Somewhere a door opened and closed. The room stayed steady. Ava noticed how much quieter her mind had become. The questions about belonging didn't feel urgent anymore. They could wait. They always could. She remembered standing at windows like this before in other cities, other nights, feeling the same smallness and mistaking it for emptiness. Tonight, that smallness felt different. It felt like space, not empty, open. The air conditioner clicked once, then resumed its hum. Ava's breathing matched it naturally, slow and even. The edges of her thoughts blurred, one dissolving into the next without resistance. She didn't need to shine in a particular way. She didn't need to be central. She didn't need to leave a mark she could track. Being here was enough. Shining quietly was enough. Some stars are seen, some are not. The sky makes room for all of them. Ava drifted toward sleep with that understanding resting gently in her body, the hotel room holding her like a temporary sky, neutral, quiet, and complete. Henry paused on the porch before sitting down, as if checking whether the night was settled enough to hold him. The wooden boards were cool beneath his bare feet. A porch swing hung slightly off-center, moving just a little in the breeze, its chain making a soft, familiar creak. Somewhere beyond the yard, crickets kept time without hurry. He lowered himself onto the swing and let it take his weight. The motion was gentle, almost accidental. Back and forth, back and forth. Not enough to call it rocking, just enough to feel carried. Henry was 58 and recently retired from the military. For most of his adult life, his days had been planned down to the minute. Wake times, briefings, objectives, even rest had been scheduled. Now, for the first time in decades, there was space. Long unmarked stretches of it. People had congratulated him, told him he'd earned this, asked what he was going to do next. Henry never quite knew how to answer. He had expected retirement to feel like relief, and sometimes it did. But more often, it felt like standing in shallow water, searching for something deeper without knowing where to swim. He wasn't unhappy. He just felt restless, as if peace were nearby but just out of reach. The swing creaked again as Henry shifted his weight. He rested his hands on his thighs and looked out at the dark yard. The grass moved slightly in the breeze, each blade responding in its own small way. The air smelled like damp earth and old wood. Earlier that evening, he had found himself pacing the house, moving from room to room without purpose. He'd opened the fridge, then closed it, picked up his phone, then set it back down. The habits of motion were still there, even when there was nothing left to complete. Henry had spent years believing happiness was something you arrived at, a point on the map, a reward at the end of enough effort. He had chased it in promotions, in achievements, in the quiet pride of being useful. And now that the chasing had stopped, the question lingered. Why doesn't it feel the way I thought it would? He leaned his head back against the porch post and let his eyes rest on the dark sky. Clouds moved slowly across it, thinning and thickening, revealing stars and then covering them again. Nothing dramatic, just steady change. Henry remembered a story someone had told him once long ago during a quiet watch. A simple story, almost a joke. A fish swimming from place to place, asking everyone it met where to find the ocean. The other fish looked at it strangely and said, "This is the ocean." And the fish replied, "No, this is water. I'm looking for the ocean." At the time, Henry had laughed and moved on. Tonight, the story returned with a different weight. He thought about how often he'd treated happiness the same way, always just ahead, just beyond the next assignment, the next chapter, the next version of himself. He had been swimming in it, perhaps without ever noticing. The swing continued its quiet motion. Henry felt his breathing begin to match it. In, out. No effort required. His shoulders dropped slightly, a small release he hadn't asked for. He noticed how the night held everything without comment. The sounds, the dark, the slow movement of air. Nothing was trying to improve him. Nothing was asking him to be more than he was right now. Henry realized how deeply he had believed that peace required a different set of circumstances. Less noise, fewer questions, a clearer sense of direction. And yet sitting here, he couldn't point to anything missing. The porch light cast a warm circle around him, leaving the rest of the yard in shadow. The boundary felt kind, not limiting. Enough light to sit. Enough darkness to rest his eyes. He thought about all the times he had postponed contentment. After this tour, after this promotion, after I finally slowed down. Each time the finish line had moved a little further out. What if the ocean wasn't somewhere else? What if it was the very thing he had been moving through all along? The thought didn't feel exciting. It felt quiet, almost obvious. The kind of realization that doesn't change anything on the outside, but loosens something on the inside. Henry placed his feet flat on the porch and let the swing slow to a stop. The night didn't rush him. It didn't need him to arrive anywhere. He sat there breathing, listening, feeling the simple fact of being held by the moment. Not searching, not reaching, just floating. And for the first time since retiring, the restlessness eased, not because it had been answered, but because it no longer needed to be. Henry let the swing come to rest and stayed there anyway, as if the movement had simply shifted inward. The night felt settled now, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, only complete. The crickets kept their rhythm. The air moved when it needed to, and then grew still again. He noticed how different his body felt when he stopped scanning for what was next. His chest wasn't tight anymore. His jaw rested easily. Even the small ache in his lower back felt neutral, like something that didn't need to be fixed right now. For most of his life, Henry had trusted effort, motion, progress. Those things had carried him far, and he didn't resent them, but sitting on the porch, surrounded by the simple sounds of the night, he realized effort had also trained him to overlook what didn't require earning. Peace, it turned out, didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with a sense of accomplishment. It felt more like permission, the permission to stop swimming for a moment and notice the water already holding you. Henry rested his hands loosely on his thighs and closed his eyes. Not to think, just to feel. The weight of his body on the swing, the steady ground beneath the porch, the air entering his lungs and leaving again without being asked. The story of the fish returned softer this time. The fish hadn't been foolish. It had been sincere. It simply hadn't known how to recognize the ocean because it had never experienced anything else. The search had made sense until it didn't. Henry smiled faintly at that. He had been sincere too. He had done what he knew how to do. He had chased what he believed would finally feel like enough. And now, with nothing left to chase, he could see it more clearly. The ocean wasn't a destination. It was a condition. It was the space that allowed everything else to move. The quiet support underneath effort, underneath struggle, underneath even the search itself. It had been present during every assignment, every long night, every question about what came next. Henry hadn't missed it. He just hadn't needed to notice it before. The porch light hummed softly above him. A cloud slid across the stars, dimming them, and then letting them reappear. Nothing in the sky seemed concerned about being seen the whole time. He thought about the future briefly, about mornings without alarms, days without clear objectives. The thought didn't scare him the way it had before. It felt open, wide, like water. Henry stood and pushed the swing gently so it wouldn't creak anymore, then stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The house welcomed him with the familiar smell of wood and quiet. He didn't turn on any lights. He didn't need to see everything clearly. In the bedroom, he moved slowly, changing into something comfortable, each motion unhurried. When he lay down, the bed accepted his weight easily. His breathing deepened without instruction. The day loosened its grip and slid away. As sleep approached, Henry felt the last trace of searching fade. There was nowhere he needed to get to tonight. Nothing he needed to solve. He was already in it. He always had been. The ocean didn't require recognition to be vast. It simply held. And held by that understanding, Henry drifted into rest, no longer looking for happiness, but finally allowing himself to feel the water he had been swimming in all along. By late afternoon, the porch was already half in shadow. Grace sat on the wooden swing with a thin cardigan pulled around her shoulders. Not because it was cold, but because the day had begun to let go of its warmth. The air carried that quiet feeling that comes just before evening, when nothing urgent is left to do, and the world doesn't expect much from you anymore. The swing moved slightly as she shifted her weight. Not enough to creak loudly, just a soft, familiar motion. Back and forth, back and forth. A rhythm she didn't think about until it was already happening. Across the yard stood the oak tree. It had been there longer than Grace had lived in the house, longer than her children had lived there, longer than most of the things that once felt important. Its trunk was thick and uneven, the bark rough and darkened with age. In the summer, it filled the yard with shade. In the winter, it stood bare and unremarkable, easy to overlook. Grace had noticed recently how people tended to overlook her too. It wasn't dramatic. No one was being cruel. It was quieter than that. Conversations moved around her instead of toward her. New ideas came from younger voices. Invitations arrived less often. When people spoke to her, it was with kindness, but also with a subtle assumption that her most active chapters were already behind her. She told herself it was fine. She had a good life, a steady routine, a job she'd done well for years. But sometimes, usually in moments like this, the thought would surface without warning. Do I still matter in the way I used to? The swing rocked again. Grace rested her hands in her lap and watched the oak tree's branches stretch outward, weight and heavy. Its leaves barely moved even when the breeze picked up. The tree didn't respond to the wind the way smaller trees did. It didn't rush. It didn't flutter. It stayed. She thought about how, when she was younger, she'd believed value came from visibility, from doing more, from being noticed, from having something to show. Back then she was all branches and leaves, busy spreading, reaching outward in every direction. Now much of that had slowed. Her days were quieter, more internal, less impressive from the outside. And part of her wondered if that meant something had been lost. The oak tree didn't seem to worry about that. It didn't try to look younger than it was. It didn't apologize for the thickness of its trunk or the heaviness of its limbs. It didn't chase attention with new growth every season. It simply stood there, rooted deep, holding the ground in a way that younger trees couldn't. Grace leaned back slightly, letting the swing support her weight. The wood pressed firmly against her spine, steady and real. She felt the tiredness in her body, not the sharp kind, but the deep layered kind that comes from years of showing up. The oak tree had rings. She knew that. Layers beneath the bark, each one marking a season of growth. Stress, weather, survival. None of them visible unless the tree was cut open. None of them obvious to someone passing by. And yet those unseen layers were the reason the tree could stand the way it did. Grace exhaled slowly. The thought settled somewhere inside her, not as a conclusion, but as a possibility. Maybe value didn't live in what people could see anymore. Maybe it had moved underground. She looked at her hands. The skin thinner than it used to be, veins more visible. These hands had held children books, grocery bags, grief, joy. They had done their work quietly, without needing to be admired. The swing rocked again, a little wider this time. The evening insects had started their low hum. Grace didn't turn on the porch light. She liked the half-light. It made everything softer, less defined. She thought about the younger version of herself, always reaching, always stretching toward the next thing. That version had been necessary, but it wasn't the only one that mattered. The oak tree had once been young too. Now its strength was not in how far it reached, but in how deeply it held. Grace sat with that image as the sky dimmed further. The yard grew still. The tree didn't move much at all, but somehow it felt more present than anything else around her. She didn't need to decide what this meant yet. She didn't need to turn it into a lesson or a reassurance. It was enough to notice the shift, to feel the weight of something steady beneath the surface. The swing slowed on its own. Grace let it. As the evening deepened, the air around the porch seemed to slow. The colors in the yard softened, edges blurring slightly, as if the day itself were getting ready to rest. Grace stayed where she was, letting the swing move less and less, until it barely shifted at all. The oak tree remained in front of her, solid and patient. She realized she had never once worried about whether the tree was still useful. No one questioned its worth, because it no longer grew quickly. No one expected it to prove anything. Its presence alone felt enough. More than enough. The shade it gave, the way it held the soil in place, the quiet sense of continuity. It all happened without asking for attention. Grace thought about how different that felt from the way people often treated themselves. How easily value became tied to output, to recognition, to how visible or impressive one appeared to be. And how, as those things naturally shifted with time, a quiet fear could slip in, whispering that something essential had been lost. The oak tree didn't seem to believe that story. Its roots were invisible, buried deep beneath the surface. They weren't admired. They weren't photographed. But they were doing the real work. Holding, nourishing, keeping the whole structure steady through storms that never made headlines. Grace placed her feet more firmly on the porch floor and let the swing come to a stop. The stillness felt kind, not empty. She noticed how her breathing had slowed, how her chest rose and fell without effort. Her body at least seemed to understand something before her thoughts did. She remembered a time years ago when she had been afraid of slowing down. Afraid that if she stopped pushing, she might disappear. That if she wasn't reaching outward, she wouldn't matter anymore. But sitting there now, she didn't feel like she was fading. She felt grounded. The oak tree had weathered seasons Grace could barely remember. Droughts, heavy rains, winters that stripped it bare. And still it stood. Not because it tried harder each year, but because it had learned how to hold itself from the inside. Grace rested her hands on the arms of the swing. The wood was smooth from years of use. Familiar, reliable. She thought about all the ways her own life had developed unseen strength through patience, through care. Through simply staying when leaving would have been easier. Those things didn't show up on the surface, but they were there. The evening insects grew louder, then settled into a steady pattern. The world didn't rush her to come inside. It didn't demand reflection or resolution. It simply continued, allowing her to be part of it without effort. Grace's gaze drifted back to the oak tree one last time before the light faded completely. She didn't feel the need to compare herself to it. The image wasn't a lesson. It was a quiet companionship. A reminder that growth doesn't always look like expansion. Sometimes it looks like depth. She stood slowly, joints stiff but cooperative, and reached for the porch light. When it came on, the yard changed again, smaller, more contained. The oak tree was still there, partially lit, partially in shadow. Unbothered by the change, Grace paused, hand still on the switch. She didn't feel the urge to hold on to the moment. She didn't feel like she might lose something if she moved on. What she had noticed would stay with her the way certain understandings do not, as thoughts to repeat, but as a steadier way of standing. Inside the house, the evening waited quietly. Grace stepped in and closed the door behind her. The oak tree remained outside, rooted and patient, doing what it had always done. Not reaching for the sky anymore. Not needing to be seen from far away. Just holding the ground. And somehow, that felt like the truest kind of strength there was. The mirror didn't flatter her. It never did. Not under that bathroom light, not this late, not after a day that had already taken too much out of her. Madison leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the edge of the sink, and stared at her own face like it belonged to someone she was still trying to understand. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes even small sounds feel loud. The faucet dripped once after she turned it off. Somewhere in the building, a distant door closed. The fan above her hummed softly, pulling warm air upward. Madison had spent most of the day looking at versions of herself. The version she posted. The version she replied with. The version she performed in short clips and captions, smiling at the right moments, sounding confident at the right times. She was good at it. She'd learned how to be on without it looking like effort. But now, alone in the bathroom, she felt like a phone with too many tabs open, bright heated, still running even after the work was over. She reached for a makeup wipe, dragged it across her cheek, and watched the cotton come away, slightly tinted. She did it again, slower this time. There was something calming about the motion. Simple, quiet, no audience. In the mirror, her eyes looked tired. Not just sleepy tired in the way someone gets when they've been holding themselves together all day. She tried to smile just to see. It looked strange, like a gesture borrowed from another room. She let it drop. Madison wasn't having a crisis. Nothing dramatic had happened. No breakup, no scandal, no big failure. It was smaller than that, and somehow harder to name. It was the feeling that her worth lived outside of her. In reactions, in numbers, in who noticed, in whether she was wanted, admired, approved of. And when the noise stopped, she wasn't always sure what was left. She turned the faucet on again, letting water run over her hands. The sound filled the bathroom with a steady hush. She splashed her face, then patted it dry with a towel that smelled faintly like laundry soap. Her phone buzzed from the counter. A notification. She didn't pick it up. Just let it sit there, lighting up the edge of the sink and then going dark again. For a moment, she watched herself breathe. It was such an ordinary thing to notice, but it made her feel strangely human. Not a brand, not a profile, just a person with lungs and skin and a nervous system that didn't care how many likes she got that day. Madison leaned closer to the mirror, studying a small line near her mouth she hadn't noticed a year ago. It wasn't deep, it wasn't alarming, but it made her think about time and how quietly it moves through you. A memory drifted in something her grandmother used to say when Madison was little, when she'd run to her crying over a scraped knee or a bad day at school. "Smile at yourself first," her grandmother would say, gentle but certain. "Don't wait for the world to decide if you're worth being kind to." Madison had rolled her eyes back then. It sounded like something from a greeting card. But standing here now, it didn't feel cheesy. It felt practical. Like advice for surviving in a world that trains you to outsource your self-worth. She set the towel down and stared at her reflection again this time, without scanning for flaws. She tried to look at herself the way she might look at a friend who'd had a long day. The way you look at someone you don't need to critique, someone you just want to understand. Her shoulders dropped slightly. It wasn't magical. It didn't fix anything. But it shifted something like moving a lamp, so the harsh shadow softens. Madison placed one hand on the edge of the sink, grounding herself, and let the other rest on her own collarbone for just a second. The warmth of her skin under her palm felt real, immediate. Not a thought, not a story, just contact. She breathed in, then out. Not as a technique, just as a permission. The phone buzzed again faintly. She ignored it again. The world could wait 2 minutes. The world could wait 10. She looked at her own eyes in the mirror. Not the whole face, not the whole image, just the eyes. They were still her eyes. Even after everything. Even after the long day, the constant output, the constant comparison. Something in them was still steady. She didn't smile yet. Not fully. But she softened her mouth just a little. Like she was letting go of a habit she didn't need to keep holding. And in that small softening, she noticed a quiet truth. It wasn't that she needed more validation. It was that she needed to stop treating herself like someone who had to earn kindness. Madison turned off the bathroom light and left the door slightly open as she walked toward her bedroom. The hallway was dim. Calm, the kind of dim that tells your brain it's safe to slow down. Behind her, the mirror stayed where it was reflecting an empty bathroom. It wasn't waiting to judge her. It wasn't asking for anything. It was just there. And for the first time all day, that felt like a relief. Madison lay back on her bed without turning on the lamp. The room was lit only by the soft glow from the streetlight outside filtered through the curtains. It wasn't dark enough to disappear into, but it was dark enough to stop inspecting everything. She rested one hand on her stomach, feeling it rise and fall. The other hand lay open beside her palm, up, fingers loose. Her body seemed to understand before her thoughts did that nothing more was required of her tonight. The day replayed itself in fragments. A comment she'd reread too many times. A moment where she'd wondered if she should have said something differently. A brief spike of relief when a post did well, followed by the quiet drop afterward. None of it arrived with the same sharpness it had earlier. It came through a layer of distance now, as if softened by the dim light. She thought again of the mirror. Not the image exactly, but the feeling of standing there without trying to fix anything. Without adjusting angles. Without searching for reassurance or bracing for disappointment. Just meeting herself as she was. That felt new. Madison realized how rarely she did that. How often she approached herself like a problem to solve a version, to improve a thing, to optimize. Even rest had become something she tried to do well, something to succeed at. But lying here with the room quiet and her phone face down on the nightstand, she felt no pull to perform. No need to curate. No one to convince. The thought came gently without insistence. I'm already here. She remembered how easy it had been earlier to place her hand on her own chest. How grounding it felt to feel warmth instead of judgment. It hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't changed her life. But it had changed the tone of the moment. Sometimes healing wasn't about breakthroughs. Sometimes it was about not adding another layer of pressure. Madison rolled slightly onto her side, tucking her knees in just enough to be comfortable. The sheets were cool. The pillow held the familiar shape of her head. Her breathing slowed not because she told it to, but because there was space for it to do so. She thought about how long she'd been waiting for permission to feel okay. Waiting for the right response, the right reaction, the right signal from outside herself. As if peace were something that had to be handed to her by someone else. But nothing had stopped her from offering it to herself. The mirror hadn't demanded anything. It hadn't praised or criticized. It had simply reflected what was there. And what was there beneath the layers of effort and expectation was someone who was tired but still whole. Someone who didn't need to earn rest. Someone who didn't need to be impressive in order to be worthy of care. Madison felt her jaw unclench slightly. Her shoulders sank into the mattress. A small exhale left her longer than the ones before. There was no urgency to fall asleep, no goal to reach. If sleep came, it would come. If it didn't, this quiet was still enough. She imagined the mirror again now, empty, the bathroom light off. Nothing staring back. Nothing asking her to be different. Just a room at rest. Her thoughts began to drift, not in a scattered way, but in the slow, wandering way that comes before sleep. Images blurred together. The sharp edges of the day softened. Madison didn't think about tomorrow. She didn't plan. She didn't rehearse. She stayed with what was simple and present: breath, warmth, stillness. If she smiled now, it wasn't for the mirror. It wasn't for anyone at all. It was the kind of smile that happens when you stop resisting yourself. Small, private, almost imperceptible. She let it fade naturally. In the quiet, there was nothing to fix, nothing to prove, nothing missing. Just a person resting inside her own life. And that was enough for the night. The hotel room was quiet in the way only temporary places are. Not the quiet of home, but the kind that doesn't know you yet. The air conditioner hummed steadily. A thin line of light slipped in through the edge of the curtains from the parking lot outside. Ava lay on the bed with her shoes already kicked off, suitcase still closed near the door, as if she hadn't decided whether to stay or leave. She was supposed to be resting. That's what layovers were for. That's what people said. But rest didn't always arrive just because the body stopped moving. Sometimes the mind kept pacing, flipping through unfinished thoughts, the way fingers flip through songs that never quite land on the right one. Ava reached for her phone, then stopped. She set it face down on the nightstand and stared up at the ceiling instead. The faint texture of the paint caught the light differently in each corner, uneven, imperfect. She followed it with her eyes until her thoughts slowed just enough to notice her own breathing again. She thought about how often her life felt like this room. Useful, functional, in motion, but somehow paused. At 29, Ava had learned how to pack light. She knew how to walk quickly through airports, how to smile without overthinking, how to adjust to time zones and expectations. She was good at moving forward. What she wasn't good at was knowing when she had arrived. Lately, a quiet unease had been following her. Not panic, not despair, just a low hum beneath everything, like a melody waiting for its next note. Is this it, or am I still warming up? She rolled onto her side and reached into her carry-on, pulling out a small notebook she kept tucked in the front pocket. It wasn't a journal exactly, more like a place for fragments, lines she liked, half-formed thoughts, things she didn't want to forget but didn't yet know how to finish. She flipped it open. Most of the pages were unfinished. Sentences that stopped mid-thought, lists without conclusions, ideas circled once, then left alone. Ava traced one line with her finger. It had been written months ago during another night in another city. I think I'm waiting for the part where it all makes sense. She smiled faintly and closed the notebook. Growing up, she'd believed life would have clear movements, verses, choruses, a bridge that explained everything before the ending arrived. She'd imagined she'd know when she reached the real part, the part that would confirm she was on the right track. But nothing had announced itself. Instead, life had unfolded quietly. Job offers that felt both exciting and uncertain. Relationships that ended not with explosions, but with gentle drifting apart. Choices that seemed reasonable at the time, then ambiguous later. Nothing had gone wrong, and yet something felt unfinished. Ava sat up and swung her legs over the side of the bed. The carpet was soft under her feet, patterned in a way she would never remember tomorrow. She walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just a little. Outside the parking lot, lights cast pale circles on the pavement. A few cars sat still, engines ticking faintly as they cooled. Somewhere in the distance, a truck passed on the highway, its sound rising and falling like a breath. She thought about how songs worked, how the first verse often didn't explain much, how melodies repeated before they resolved, how some of the most meaningful parts were transitions, places where nothing seemed to happen, but everything was quietly shifting. Maybe life was more like that than she'd expected. Maybe it wasn't meant to be judged mid-song. Ava rested her forehead lightly against the cool glass. The reflection that looked back at her was faint, layered over the dark outside. She didn't study it. She didn't search for answers there. She just stood. The feeling of being behind softened slightly. Not gone, just quieter. Like a note that didn't need to be resolved right away. She returned to the bed and lay back down, this time pulling the blanket up around her shoulders. The room held her without comment. It didn't ask where she was going next. It didn't ask if she was doing enough. It just existed, complete in its temporary way. Ava closed her eyes. For the first time that evening, she allowed the thought to settle without argument. Maybe this part isn't missing anything. Maybe it's just not finished yet. The air conditioner continued its steady rhythm. The light outside didn't change. The song of her life stayed right where it was open, unresolved, still unfolding. And that, for now, was enough to rest inside. Ava didn't fall asleep right away. She lay there listening to the quiet mechanics of the room, the steady hum of the air conditioner, the faint electrical buzz inside the walls, the distant sound of tires on asphalt far below. None of it asked for her attention. It was the kind of background noise that didn't interrupt thought, but gently slowed it. Her mind wandered again, but this time without urgency. She thought about all the moments she'd labeled as in between. The jobs that weren't quite careers. The relationships that mattered but didn't last. The cities she passed through without planting roots. She had treated those chapters like placeholders, like they were supposed to lead somewhere else before they could count. But lying here now, she wondered if that was fair. Songs didn't rush to their endings. They lingered. They repeated phrases. They left space between notes. Ava rolled onto her back and placed one hand on her chest, feeling the gentle rise and fall beneath her palm. Her heartbeat was calm, unremarkable, steady enough to trust. She remembered being younger and assuming that clarity would arrive all at once. That one day she'd wake up knowing exactly who she was and what came next. That life would lock into place like a finished composition. Instead, it had kept improvising. And maybe that wasn't a flaw. Maybe it was the nature of being alive. She thought about the notebook again, about all the half-written lines she'd collected over the years. She'd always told herself she'd finish them later when she understood more. But maybe the unfinished lines weren't waiting to be completed. Maybe they were meant to stay open like questions that didn't need answers to be meaningful. The room felt softer now, as if the edges had blurred. Ava adjusted the pillow under her head and felt her shoulders sink deeper into the mattress. The tension she'd carried earlier, the sense that she was running out of time, had loosened its grip. She wasn't late. She wasn't early. She was simply here inside this measure of the song. Outside, a car door closed. Someone laughed briefly, then the sound faded. Life continued without announcing its purpose, without explaining itself. Ava let her breathing follow the rhythm of the room. In, out. No effort, no correction. She realized she'd been judging her life as if it were already over, as if the ending had been written and she was falling short of it. But you couldn't judge a melody before it resolved. You couldn't call a song incomplete when it was still being played. The pressure to define herself softened. She didn't need to know where everything was leading. She didn't need to label this chapter. She didn't need to turn her uncertainty into a problem to solve tonight. Some parts of life were meant to be lived before they were understood. Ava's thoughts slowed, further drifting like notes stretched longer than usual. The sense of being unfinished no longer felt like a failure. It felt like permission. Permission to continue without explanation. Permission to rest without resolution. The hotel room stayed quiet and neutral, offering no commentary. The temporary nature of it all felt strangely comforting. Nothing here was asking her to stay forever. Nothing was asking her to leave either, just to be. Ava's hand slipped from her chest to the mattress beside her. Her fingers relaxed, curling naturally. The last clear thought that passed through her mind was gentle and unforced. The song isn't done, and it doesn't need to be. Sleep came quietly after that, not as a reward, not as a conclusion, but as a pause between notes. The music continued somewhere beneath it all, unhurried, still unfolding. Lila sat in her car with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel long after the drive was over. The parking lot was quiet, washed in pale yellow light from a single lamp above. She could still smell the hospital on her clothes, Cleaning solution latex, something faintly metallic. The smell lingered no matter how many times she told herself the shift was finished. She hadn't turned the radio on. She hadn't checked her phone. She just sat there breathing slowly, letting the silence press in around her. It had been a heavy day, not dramatic, not urgent, just heavy in the way hospice days often were. Quiet conversations, long pauses, a hand held a little longer than usual, a goodbye that didn't need words. Lila was good at this work. She knew how to be present without fixing, how to sit beside someone without filling the space. People often told her she had a calming presence, as if it were something she'd been born with. They didn't see the weight she carried afterward. She reached for the small towel she kept in the car and wiped her hands, even though they were already clean. It was a habit she'd developed over time. Not to remove dirt exactly, but to mark a transition. Work to home, holding to releasing. Still, some days, it didn't feel like enough. Lila leaned back in the seat and closed her eyes. Images from the day drifted through her mind, not sharply, but insistently. A quiet room, a shallow breath, a family member standing in the doorway, unsure where to put their grief. She felt tired in a way sleep didn't always touch. A thought surfaced, one she didn't like but knew well. Why does so much pain pass through me? Not as a complaint, more as a wondering, as if she were trying to understand the cost of caring. Outside the car, the night air had cooled. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on water, hissing softly against grass. The sound grounded her, pulling her attention outward for a moment. Lila opened her eyes and looked at her hands again. They were steady, capable, ordinary hands that had done extraordinary things simply by staying. She thought about something she'd learned early on back when she first started volunteering. An older nurse had said it casually one afternoon while they stood washing their hands side by side. Nothing grows clean, she'd said, not the good stuff. At the time, Lila hadn't known what to make of it. It sounded like one of those phrases people repeat without thinking. But over the years, the meaning had settled in. She pictured a lotus the way she'd once seen it in a book, blooming above dark water roots, buried deep in thick mud. The image wasn't pretty if you looked too closely at the bottom. But the flower itself wasn't diminished by where it came from. It was shaped by it. Lila exhaled slowly. The idea didn't erase the day. It didn't turn grief into something beautiful. It simply reframed it just enough to keep her from pushing it away. Maybe the mud wasn't a sign she was doing something wrong. Maybe it was the ground she was growing from. She sat there longer than usual, letting that thought rest without arguing with it. She didn't need to believe it fully. She just needed to let it exist alongside the tiredness. When she finally opened the car door, the cool air met her skin. She stepped out and stretched her shoulders, feeling the tightness release slightly. The night sky above was dark, cloudless. No stars visible from this lot. That was okay. Not every place needed to be beautiful. Lila walked toward her building keys, in hand, footsteps slow. With each step, the day felt a little less sticky. Not gone, just less attached. She knew tomorrow would bring more of the same. More quiet endings. More moments she couldn't fix. more weight, but she also knew something else now. Something she'd learned not from books, but from standing where she stood. What grew in her wasn't despite the mud. It was because of it. Inside her apartment, Lila moved slowly, as if the night itself had asked her not to rush. She set her keys down in the same small bowl by the door, hung her jacket on the hook, and slipped off her shoes. The familiar sounds of home settled around her, the soft click of the lamp turning on the distant hum of a refrigerator. The quiet steadiness of a place that asked nothing from her. She washed her hands again at the sink, letting the water run longer than necessary. Not to clean, but to feel. Warmth over skin. Movement without effort. She dried them carefully and noticed how her shoulders had dropped without her telling them to. Lila walked into the living room and sat on the couch, feet tucked beneath her. The cushion gave way gently. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle instead of resisting it. The images returned softer now. Faces, voices, silence. They didn't demand anything. They just passed through like clouds moving slowly across a night sky. She realized something she hadn't always understood when she was younger. That caring didn't mean carrying everything forever, that being open didn't require staying soaked. There was a difference between allowing something to touch you and letting it drown you. The lotus came to her mind again. Not as a picture this time, but as a feeling. The sense of something rising steadily without hurry through thick water. It didn't curse the mud. It didn't rush past it. It simply used it. Lila placed one hand on her chest and felt her breathing steady, quiet, alive. Her heart beat on, unconcerned with the stories she told herself about the day. It just kept going, faithful and patient. She thought about how often people praised strength without understanding what it was made of. How they admired calm without seeing the effort beneath it. How they loved the flower but forgot the soil. But the soil remembered. The mud held everything. The mess, the decay, the nutrients. Without it, there was nothing to rise from. Lila didn't feel lighter exactly. The weight was still there. But it had shifted, settling lower, no longer pressing against her chest. It felt like something she could rest on instead of something she had to fight. She stretched her legs out along the couch and adjusted the blanket over her lap. The fabric was soft, worn just enough to feel familiar. She let her head rest against the cushion and noticed how easily her body fit into the space. Tonight didn't need to be resolved. Nothing needed to be transformed. The work she did mattered not because it was clean or uplifting, but because it was real, because it met life where it actually was not where it wished it could be. Lila's breathing slowed further. Each inhale felt less deliberate, each exhale a little longer. The room grew quieter, or maybe she simply noticed it less. She thought about tomorrow, not with dread, not with planning, but with acceptance. Another day would come, more mud, more moments of quiet courage, more small acts that no one would see, and that was fine. The lotus didn't bloom all at once. It didn't hurry. It didn't apologize for where it grew. Lila let that image soften and fade, leaving only the sense of steady rising of something alive and intact beneath everything. Her eyes stayed closed. The room held her gently. The night did not ask her to be anything other than what she already was. Rooted, breathing, still growing. And for now, that was enough. The phone was still in her hand when Priya realized she hadn't heard her own thoughts in hours. The room was dim lit only by a small lamp on the nightstand. Outside traffic passed in slow waves, the sound softened by distance and glass. Priya lay on her bed with one leg bent, the other stretched out, scrolling without really seeing anything. Opinions, updates, advice, noise. Her thumb moved automatically, trained by habit more than interest. Every post seemed to carry a suggestion, what to care about, what to fix, what to become. None of it was meant specifically for her, but all of it felt oddly personal. She sighed and locked the screen, placing the phone face down beside her. The sudden quiet felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room after music stops. Priya stared at the ceiling. She'd always been good at listening. At work, she absorbed feedback easily, adjusted quickly, stayed aware of expectations. Among friends, she picked up on moods, unspoken tensions, shifts in tone. She had learned early that paying attention kept things smooth. But somewhere along the way, listening had turned outward almost entirely. Lately, she'd felt unsure in small ways, not lost, just disconnected. Decisions that used to feel simple now came with hesitation. She found herself asking for reassurance more often, checking reactions before trusting her own instincts. It wasn't that she didn't have an inner voice. It was that it had become very quiet. Priya rolled onto her side and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. The fabric brushed softly against her skin. She adjusted the pillow until it felt just right, then stilled. In the absence of the phone's glow, the room felt larger, slower. Her breathing, which she hadn't noticed before, became more obvious, steady, a little shallow, then deeper. She remembered something her mother used to say when Priya was younger, usually when she was overwhelmed or unsure. If you can't hear yourself, she'd say, it doesn't mean you're lost. It just means the room is loud. At the time, Priya hadn't thought much of it. Now, lying here with the world temporarily muted, the words surfaced gently. She closed her eyes. At first, there was nothing, just static, leftover thoughts from the day. Half-finished conversations, to-do lists that hadn't gotten the message that the day was over. She didn't push them away. She let them pass. Slowly, the noise thinned. Priya noticed the smallest sensations, the weight of the blanket, the warmth of the mattress, the way her jaw loosened when she wasn't paying attention to it. These weren't messages or insights, just signals that she was here. And then beneath all that, something softer. Not words, not instructions, a sense. It was easy to miss, like a whisper that didn't insist on being heard. It didn't argue. It didn't explain itself. It simply felt true, familiar, almost shy. Priya didn't try to name it. She stayed still, afraid that effort might make it disappear. She realized how different this felt from the noise she usually responded to. The loud opinions came with urgency, with pressure, with certainty about what should be done next. This quiet voice didn't rush. It didn't compete. It waited. Priya breathed in slowly, then out. The quiet didn't go away. It stayed right where it was, not asking to be followed, just asking to be noticed. She thought about how often she'd mistaken volume for wisdom, how often she'd trusted what spoke the loudest, the fastest, the most confidently, and how that had slowly taught her to doubt what arrived gently. The quiet voice wasn't fragile. It was patient. It had been there the whole time. Priya turned slightly onto her back, one hand resting on her stomach. Her breathing deepened again naturally, as if her body recognized the moment before her mind did. She didn't need to decide anything tonight. She didn't need to act on what she felt. She just needed to remember that it existed. The lamp cast a soft circle of light on the wall. The rest of the room stayed in shadow. The outside world continued, but it felt farther away now. Priya let herself stay in that space where nothing demanded her attention, where no one else's voice crowded the room. The quiet voice didn't say much, but it was enough to know it was there. Priya stayed where she was, letting the stillness settle around her. The room felt different now. Not emptier, just calmer. Like a lake after the wind passes when the surface smooths out on its own. The sounds from outside hadn't disappeared completely, but they no longer pulled at her attention. They moved in the background, unimportant. Her breathing slowed without effort. Each inhale felt softer, each exhale a little longer, as if her body was finally being allowed to finish a sentence it had been holding. The quiet voice didn't grow louder. It didn't need to. It stayed exactly the same, gentle, steady, unconcerned with whether she noticed it again tomorrow. It wasn't there to persuade her or push her toward a decision. It wasn't there to compete with anything else. It simply existed. Priya realized how much trust that required. To speak without urgency, to offer guidance without force, to wait without fear of being ignored. She thought about how often she'd overridden that voice in the past, not because it was wrong, but because it was subtle. Because it didn't come wrapped in certainty or approval. Because it didn't sound like anyone else. But lying here now, she could feel the difference between what calmed her and what agitated her. Between what felt aligned and what felt imposed. The quiet voice didn't make her anxious. It didn't make her feel behind. It made her feel settled. Priya shifted slightly, pulling the blanket higher. The fabric brushed her chin, warm and familiar. Her thoughts wandered, but they no longer demanded answers. They drifted like loose threads, not problems to solve. She remembered moments when she'd followed that inner sense without knowing why, choosing a path that didn't make sense to others, saying no when yes would have been easier, leaving something that looked good on the outside but felt wrong on the inside. Those moments hadn't always been comfortable, but they had been honest. The quiet voice wasn't always about comfort. It was about truth. And truth, she realized, didn't need to shout to be real. Her hand rested lightly on her stomach, fingers relaxed. She felt the subtle movement of breath beneath her palm. This body knew things too. It tightened when something was off. It softened when something was right. It had been speaking all along. Priya smiled faintly, not at a thought, but at the realization that she wasn't broken for feeling uncertain. She hadn't lost her way. She had simply been listening in the wrong direction for a while. The noise of the day faded further. Tomorrow didn't press in. The past loosened its grip. There was only this moment, quiet, unremarkable, complete. She didn't promise herself she'd always listen better from now on. She didn't turn the insight into a rule or a goal. She knew the noise would return. It always did. But now she also knew where to find herself when it did. The quiet voice didn't leave. It stayed beneath everything like a steady current under the surface. Always there, always accessible, never demanding. Priya's eyes remained closed as sleep began to approach, not abruptly, but gradually. Her thoughts thinned, stretched, then softened into something less defined. The last clear sensation she noticed was a feeling of trust, not in outcomes, not in certainty, but in her own inner rhythm. The world could keep talking. She knew how to listen inward now, and that was enough to rest. The garden was smaller than they remembered. Not tiny, not disappointing, just quieter. Tucked behind the house, partly hidden by a leaning fence and a line of bushes that had grown uneven over the years. In the daytime, it was easy to overlook. From the kitchen window, it looked like nothing special. Just dirt, some green, a few stubborn patches where weeds had taken over. But at night, with the string lights turned on and the air cooling down, it felt like a different place. They stepped outside barefoot, the wood of the deck cool under their feet. The door closed softly behind them, and the sounds of the house faded. Inside there were still reminders, phones, messages, unfinished thoughts. But out here, the night held things more gently. They hadn't planned to come into the garden. Earlier, they'd been scrolling on the couch phone glowing in the dim living room, watching other lives unfold in neat rectangles, smiling faces, announcements, new beginnings that looked clean and confident. Each swipe carried a quiet question. Why does everyone else seem so ready? The feeling wasn't jealousy exactly, more like a soft ache. A sense of being behind or unfinished or not quite ready to be seen. So they stood up without much thought, slipped on a sweater, and stepped outside. The garden didn't greet them. It didn't offer comfort or answers. It just existed. Leaves rustled lightly in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a sprinkler clicked on and off its rhythm, steady and unconcerned. They walked slowly along the narrow path, noticing details they usually ignored. A plant that had grown sideways, leaning toward the light. Soil that had dried and cracked near the edges. A corner where nothing had taken root at all. It was clear they hadn't been tending this place much. Life had been full lately, full of adjusting to other people's needs, full of trying to be open, available, understanding, full of letting others in before they were sure they themselves felt steady. There was a time when they believed healing happened through connection alone, through being chosen, through being seen by someone else and held there long enough to feel real again. But standing in the garden now, they noticed something simple and uncomfortable at the same time. Nothing here was growing because someone else liked it. Nothing here was blooming for approval. The garden didn't perform. They knelt down near a small patch of soil, brushing their fingers across the surface. It was dry, but not dead. Beneath the top layer, there was still coolness, still potential. They could feel it. A memory surfaced of inviting people in too soon, of sharing tender parts before they had learned how to protect them, of hoping someone else would know what to do with the pieces they themselves didn't yet understand. The intention had always been good. They weren't careless. They were just eager to feel whole again, eager to skip the slow part. They reached for the watering can resting against the fence. It was lighter than expected, nearly empty. They filled it halfway from the hose, listening as the water rushed in, then slowed. As they poured, the soil darkened instantly. The change was visible, immediate, satisfying in a quiet way. No one was watching. No one needed to know this was happening. It felt different from the effort they usually made. Usually, care was outward-facing. A text sent at the right time, a thoughtful response, a version of themselves shaped to fit the moment. That kind of care took energy and left very little behind. This kind of care stayed. They moved slowly, watering only where it was needed. Not everything at once. Just one section, then another. The sprinkler down the street kept ticking, a steady backdrop, like a reminder that growth doesn't rush even when no one is paying attention. As they worked, a thought formed, not sharp, not demanding. What if this space is meant for me first? Not as a rule, not as a boundary shouted out loud, just as a quiet order of things. Care inward, then outward. Roots before invitations. They realized how often they treated themselves like a shared space. Open hours, no clear edges. Anyone could enter any time. And when something was damaged, they blamed themselves for not being stronger. But gardens don't work that way. You don't invite people in while you're still planting seeds and expect them not to step on anything. You don't leave the gate wide open during a storm and wonder why things get uprooted. You tend. You protect. You learn the rhythm of the place. Only then do you open it. They set the watering can down and sat back on their heels. The air smelled faintly of wet earth. Crickets had started their low, uneven song. The lights above cast soft circles on the ground, leaving the rest in shadow. Nothing dramatic had changed. No sudden clarity. No feeling of being fully healed. But something had shifted. The garden felt less like something they were neglecting and more like something that was waiting. Patient. Unoffended. Ready to respond when given attention. They stayed there longer than they expected, hands resting loosely in their lap, watching the soil absorb what it needed. For the first time in a while, the urge to reach outward to check messages, to see who was thinking of them, to look for reassurance didn't feel so urgent. There was work to do here. Quiet work. Work that didn't ask to be witnessed. And for tonight, that felt like enough. They didn't fix everything that night. Some weeds were still there. some patches stayed bare. The fence still leaned a little to the left, and one of the lights flickered when the breeze picked up. The garden didn't suddenly become beautiful in the way pictures online tend to be. And somehow, that made it easier to stay. They rinsed their hands with the hose and stood up slowly, feeling the stretch in their knees, the weight of their body settling back into itself. The soil clung lightly to their fingers, a quiet reminder that they'd been here, that they'd touched something real. As they walked the path again, they noticed where the ground dipped, where the stones didn't quite line up. These weren't flaws exactly, just signs of use, of time. It occurred to them that healing might look more like this than they'd expected. Not a reset, not a clean slate, just learning the shape of what's already there and caring for it without asking it to be different first. They sat on the low step at the edge of the garden, pulling the sweater tighter around their shoulders. The air had cooled enough to raise a light chill on their skin. Somewhere nearby, the sprinklers shut off, leaving behind a deeper kind of quiet. For a moment, they imagined inviting someone into this space. Not as a test, not as a hope that being chosen would fix something. Just as an offering made from a place that wasn't starving anymore. The image felt different from the ones they'd carried before. There was no urgency in it. No sense of please stay or don't leave. Just a calm curiosity about what it might be like to share something that was already tended. They realized how often they'd mistaken openness for healing. They'd believed that if they let people see everything, every crack, every fear, every unfinished piece, then closeness would come naturally. And sometimes it did. But often it came with confusion, with overstepping, with the quiet resentment that followed when their softness wasn't handled gently. It wasn't that others had done something wrong. It was that the garden hadn't been ready. They had opened the gate before learning how to care for the soil, before understanding which plants needed shade, which needed space, which ones grew slowly and couldn't be rushed. Sitting there now, they felt something soften in the way they thought about themselves. They hadn't failed at healing. They hadn't loved the wrong way. They had simply been tending outward before tending inward. And that wasn't a flaw, just an order that needed adjusting. They stood again and walked to the gate, resting their hand on the latch. It creaked softly under their touch. They didn't open it. They didn't close it tighter either. They just felt its weight the way it could move when asked. Choice felt like that sometimes. Not a decision shouted into the world, but a hand resting on a latch, aware that movement was possible. The lights overhead hummed faintly. A moth circled once, then disappeared into the dark. The garden breathed in its own quiet way, alive, but not demanding. They thought about tomorrow, about conversations that might happen, about invitations they might receive or offer. For the first time, those thoughts didn't feel heavy. They didn't need to decide anything tonight. Healing they were learning didn't ask for big promises. It asked for small, consistent care, for showing up in the same place again and again, even when no one else was there to notice. Before going inside, they turned back once more. The garden looked different now, not because it had changed, but because they had. It wasn't a place to escape into. It was a place to return to. A place that held them without needing anything in exchange. Inside the house, the couch and phone and familiar noises waited. Life would continue. Connections would form and fade as they always did. But there was a quiet understanding they carried with them as they stepped back inside. They didn't need to be fully healed to be worthy. They didn't need to be chosen to be whole. Their value wasn't waiting outside the gate. It was already rooted here. The laundromat was nearly empty. Two machines hummed along the back wall, their metal doors spinning slowly, rhythm steady and unhurried. A vending machine glowed in the corner, offering snacks no one seemed interested in. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting everything in the same pale wash. They sat on a hard plastic chair, laundry basket at their feet, phone resting loosely in their hand. It was late enough that no one expected conversation. People came here to wait to pass time, to let machines do work they didn't want to do themselves. No one asked questions. No one noticed much. They glanced at their phone again, not because there was anything new, but because habit pulled their thumb downward. Another scroll, another image, another life laid out in a clean frame. Someone announcing a promotion, someone smiling in a new city, someone else posting a caption about finally feeling like themselves. Each image landed quietly, but together they built a familiar weight. Everyone else is moving forward. The thought came without drama. It didn't shout, it didn't accuse. It just settled in heavy and convincing, like a fact that didn't need to be questioned. They locked the phone and slipped it into their pocket, feeling a brief sense of relief followed quickly by discomfort. Without the screen, there was nothing to distract from the feeling underneath. The dryers continued their slow rotation. A loose coin rattled inside one of the machines, tapping metal in a steady, uneven pattern. It sounded almost like a reminder, something small, out of place, but persistent. They stood up and walked to one of the washers, pressing their face close to the glass. Clothes tumbled through cloudy watercolors, blending together for a moment before separating again. Socks, shirts, a towel. Ordinary things, indistinguishable in motion. When the cycle ended, they opened the door and reached inside. Warmth met their hands, along with the faint smell of detergent. They pulled out a shirt, then another, stacking them carefully in the basket. As they worked, they noticed their hands. One thumb had a small scar near the joint, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. A thin white line left behind from years ago. They couldn't even remember how it happened anymore. It had become part of the landscape of their skin. They turned their hands slightly, watching the lines shift as their fingers moved. No two looked exactly the same. The ridges curved and split in patterns that felt deliberate, though they knew they weren't. Fingerprints. They had learned once in school that no two were identical, not in any meaningful way. Even among billions of people, each person carried something that had never been repeated and never would be. Standing there holding damp fabric, the thought felt strange. They had spent so much time measuring themselves against others, matching timelines, comparing achievements, wondering why their path looked slower, messier, less certain. It rarely occurred to them to question the comparison itself. You don't expect one fingerprint to match another. You don't call it a failure when it doesn't. The idea hovered, not quite landing yet. They moved to a folding table and began laying clothes flat, smoothing out wrinkles with the side of their hand. The table was cool, its surface marked with scratches and faint stains from years of use. Countless people had stood here folding their own lives into neat stacks before carrying them back out into the world. They folded slowly, deliberately, a sleeve tucked in, a corner aligned, each movement simple, repetitive, calming. Their mind drifted back to the feeling they'd had earlier, that sense of being behind. It had followed them for months now, showing up in quiet moments like this, not as panic, but as a dull, constant pressure. I should be further along. I should know what I'm doing by now. Everyone else seems to have figured it out. They paused, hands resting on a folded shirt. What if the reason it feels impossible to catch up is because there's no one to catch up to? The question didn't bring immediate comfort. It felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. Letting go of comparison meant letting go of the map they'd been using, even if that map had never really worked for them. They picked up another piece of clothing, this time noticing the small differences. The way fabric wore thin in some places. The way seams held despite strain. Each item carried signs of its own use, its own history. No two shirts had aged the same way, even if they'd been bought together. The dryers beeped softly one by one, signaling their cycles had ended. A man in a hoodie entered the laundromat, nodded without looking up, and loaded his clothes into a machine. The space adjusted to his presence, then settled again. They stacked the last folded item and sat back down, hands resting on their knees. Their fingers left faint prints on the smooth plastic of the chair. Not visible for long. Just a slight smudge that caught the light, then disappeared. Most of the time they felt invisible, like nothing about them stood out, like they were blending into the background of their own life. But fingerprints didn't announce themselves. They were there whether anyone noticed or not. They existed without needing approval. They waited as the machines cooled, the rhythm of the room steady and predictable. The weight in their chest hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It felt less like proof of failure and more like a habit, something learned, not something true. They reached for their phone again, then stopped. Let it stay in their pocket. They looked at their hands once more. The lines were still there, unchanged, quiet, and for the first time in a while, that felt like something solid to stand on. They finished folding and slid the last stack into the laundry basket. The basket felt heavier now, not just with clothes, but with the quiet satisfaction of something completed without rush. They carried it to the empty chair and sat down again. The plastic creaked softly under their weight. The dryers were still warm, giving off a low hum that filled the room without demanding attention. They rested their hands on the basket, fingers spread slightly, and noticed the faint impressions they left behind on the smooth lid. Not clear enough to study, not permanent, just a brief mark of contact. It made them think about how often they'd tried to leave stronger impressions elsewhere. trying to be louder, trying to be clearer, trying to be more impressive, more certain, more something. As if being unmistakable was the same thing as being valuable. They had spent years believing that if their life didn't look recognizable, if it didn't fit into familiar shapes and timelines, then it must be wrong. Too slow, too late, too different. But fingerprints were different by design. They weren't meant to line up. They weren't meant to be compared side by side and judged for consistency. Their value wasn't in how closely they matched, but in the fact that they never did. The thought settled slowly. What if my path isn't delayed, just distinct? The idea didn't come with a rush of confidence. It didn't erase doubt or suddenly make everything feel clear, but it softened something. It loosened the grip of that constant internal measuring stick. They looked around the laundromat again. Different loads, different fabrics, different people passing through at different times of night, carrying different weights. No one here was ahead or behind. They were all just here, waiting for the machines to finish trusting the process enough to sit still. They thought about moments in their life that hadn't made sense at the time. Detours that felt unnecessary. Pauses that felt embarrassing. Choices that didn't translate well when explained to others. Those moments hadn't been wasted. They had shaped the lines, added texture, created depth in places no one else could replicate. Just like the small scar on their thumb. Just like the ridges that bent and split in patterns no one had chosen, but only they carried. They flexed their fingers slowly, feeling the joints move, the skin stretch and settle back into place. The body knew itself in ways the mind often forgot. A dryer clicked off its door, unlocking with a soft metallic sound. They stood, lifted the basket, and moved toward the exit. The door chimed gently as they pushed it open, letting in a breath of cool night air. Outside, the street was quiet. A single streetlight flickered, then steadied. The world felt open in a way it hadn't earlier. Not because anything had changed, but because they weren't trying so hard to match it. They walked to their car and set the basket in the trunk. Before closing it, they paused, hands resting on the edge, feeling the chill of the metal. They didn't need to know exactly where they were headed next. They didn't need a clean narrative or a polished explanation. They didn't need proof that their life made sense to anyone else. Their value wasn't waiting at the end of a comparison. It was already present, pressed quietly into everything they touched. Like a fingerprint, not loud, not identical, but unmistakably their own. They closed the trunk and got into the car. As they drove away, the laundromat lights faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the steady flow of the road ahead. The lines on their hands stayed with them, unchanged, unrushed. Enough. Sometimes anxiety doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes much more quietly, like a string that's been pulled tight all day long. By evening, it doesn't snap. It doesn't make a sound. It just vibrates faintly inside, just enough to keep you from fully resting. You're not panicking. You still do everything you're supposed to do. But when the day is over, when the house is quiet, when no one needs anything from you anymore, That string still hasn't loosened. Susan knows that feeling well. She's 49, a mid-level manager at a large company, the kind of person whose calendar is full a week in advance. That evening, she's sitting alone at the kitchen table. The overhead light is off. Only a small lamp casts a soft glow onto the wooden surface. In front of her is a printed performance review folded neatly in half, placed carefully, like something that needs to be dealt with. Beside it sits a cup of tea that went cold a while ago. In the quiet kitchen, the wall clock sounds louder than usual. Tick-tock. Each beat a reminder that time keeps moving, whether she moves with it or not. Susan reaches out and touches the paper, smoothing the crease with her fingers, then stops. She's already read it 3 times today. Nothing unexpected. A few compliments. A few bullet points for improvement. The kind of language she could almost predict before reading it. And yet, her chest still feels tight. Not because she's afraid of losing her job. Not because anyone blamed her. Just that familiar sense of not being enough. Not good enough. Not fast enough. Not careful enough. As if there's an invisible force constantly pulling the string inside her a little tighter, just in case it can still hold. Susan lifts the cup and takes a small sip, then sets it back down when she realizes it's cold. She doesn't get up to reheat it. She just watches the faint steam on the ceramic fade into the air. For a brief moment, she notices her shoulders are raised. Not from the cold, but from tension. She lets them drop gently, almost without thinking. And just from that small movement, her breath deepens slightly. Some strings, if they're too loose, make no sound. But if they're pulled too tight, no one else has to pull them anymore. They start hurting themselves. Not out of malice, just from trying to do their job for too long. Susan isn't thinking about philosophy. She's just looking at the paper in front of her and realizing she's reading it like a verdict, not a work note. Each bullet point is tied to a familiar voice in her head. I should have done better. Why didn't I think of that sooner? Someone else would have handled this better. She folds the paper again more carefully this time and sets it off to the side of the table out of reach. Not putting it away forever, just not keeping it right in front of her. That small action creates a strange kind of space, like setting down something heavy and realizing you've been carrying it longer than you thought. Susan leans back in her chair. The wooden back is firm, not comfortable, but solid enough to support her. She closes her eyes for a moment, then opens them again. She isn't trying to meditate. She isn't trying to calm herself down. She's just sitting there in her familiar kitchen under the warm light, with the clock still ticking at its steady, unhurried pace. There's something people rarely say about those who worry a lot. They don't worry because they enjoy it. They worry because they've grown used to holding everything together. And when they loosen their grip even a little, it feels like they're doing something wrong. As if the moment they stop holding on, everything will fall apart. Susan opens a drawer and takes out a pen, turning it slowly between her fingers. The soft sound of plastic brushing against itself barely registers. She thinks about tomorrow, the meeting, the tasks, the things that could happen. And then unexpectedly, she realizes she doesn't need to solve all of it right now. Not because it doesn't matter, but because this moment isn't meant for pulling the string any tighter. She sets the pen down. Both hands rest on the table, feeling the cool surface beneath her palms. One breath comes in, one breath goes out. Not much deeper than usual, just slower, as if her body is quietly finding its way back to balance. Not too tight, not giving up. If you're listening to this and recognize yourself in the habit of holding everything too tightly, that's okay. You don't need to completely let go. You only need to stop pulling a little more, just enough to let the string loosen so it doesn't hurt you anymore. Susan stands, turns off the kitchen light, and leaves the room in dimness. The folded paper is still there. It hasn't disappeared. It will still be there tomorrow. But tonight she doesn't need to tense herself around it, and maybe just that alone is enough for one night. After turning off the kitchen light, Susan doesn't go straight to bed. She pauses for a moment in the hallway where the light from the living room spills out just enough that she doesn't need to turn on another lamp. It's not because there's more to do. Her body just isn't in a hurry. When you're used to living in a constant rhythm of getting things done, standing still for a few seconds can feel strangely unfamiliar. She walks slowly into the living room. On the bookshelf are books she read a long time ago, their spines slightly worn. Susan reaches out and touches one at random. She doesn't pull it out. She just lets her fingertips rest on the cover. There were times she believed she always needed to read more, learn more, improve more. But tonight that sense of lack isn't there. There's only a feeling of enough for now. She sits down on the sofa. She doesn't adjust the cushions. She doesn't search for the perfect position. She just sits the way her body wants to sit. One foot on the floor, the other loosely bent. Her shoulders rest against the back of the couch. A long exhale slips out. Not on purpose, just because there's no longer a reason to hold it in. The string inside her, the one that's been pulled tight all day, doesn't suddenly loosen all at once. It doesn't disappear, but it stops vibrating. Like a string after it's been set down, no longer pulled, no longer touched. The sound fades, not because it's forced into silence, but because there's no more tension acting on it. Susan thinks about all the times she's tried to do things right, on time, by the book, meeting expectations. She doesn't regret those efforts. They brought her here. But maybe not every moment requires the same amount of force. There are stretches of the road where gripping the steering wheel like you're on the highway will only tire you out before you arrive. Outside, the city keeps moving at its own pace. A car passes by, then fades into the distance. A traffic light changes color at the corner. Susan doesn't follow any of it closely. She just knows that things are still happening even without her involvement. There's a quiet relief in that realization, hard to put into words. She rests both hands on her thighs. Her palms feel warmer than the tabletop from earlier. Her fingers curl naturally, not clenched, not stretched open, just there, in between. Maybe this is what people mean by balance, but Susan doesn't need to name it. She just knows this position doesn't hurt. If a thought comes up, she doesn't push it away. She simply notices it. "Oh, there it is," and lets it pass like a distant sound. Not every thought needs to be followed to the end. Some only need to be seen. Time seems to slow down, or maybe the pressure around time has eased. Susan doesn't check the clock. She doesn't need to know how much time has passed. In that quiet space, she realizes something very simple. Peace doesn't come from having everything sorted out. It comes from stopping the sorting, at least for now. She stands up again this time to go to bed. She doesn't bring the printed review with her. She doesn't bring the pen. She only brings a body that feels a little lighter than before. When she lies down, she doesn't force her eyes to close. She lets her eyelids grow heavy in their own time. Some nights, you don't need a solution. You only need permission to stop pulling the string, to let it stay at its natural tension, not so loose that you give up, not so tight that it hurts, just enough that tomorrow when you need it, it can still resonate in a healthier way. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this story, that's completely okay. There's no right moment to sleep. There's only the moment your body is ready. And if you're still awake, that's okay too. You're in a space that doesn't demand anything from you. No pressure, no urgency, no grading. Just one more breath, in and out. As light as setting down something you've been holding all day. The night doesn't need you to be perfect. It only needs you to stop bracing. Listen for a little while, and then let yourself sleep. Sometimes what exhausts us isn't the road ahead, but the things we're still carrying from the part of the road already behind us. Tasks that are finished, situations that are over, decisions that have already been made. And yet, in our minds, none of them have truly been set down. Miguel is 45 years old. He works as a cook in a small restaurant. His evening shift ends late. When he steps outside, the sky is already fully dark. The street in front of the restaurant quieter now, with only a few streetlights spilling onto the pavement. He walks home the way he's done for years. Not because he doesn't have a car, but because walking helps him let the day slowly drain away. Over Miguel's shoulder hangs an old canvas bag. Inside there's nothing heavy. An extra shirt, a water bottle, a few small things. And yet, his shoulder aches. Not because of the bag, but because all day long he's been carrying far more than what's inside it. In his mind, a sentence from earlier keeps replaying. A small moment in the kitchen. A decision he made on instinct, then questioned afterward. I should have done that differently. The thought keeps circling as if it hasn't accepted that the moment has already passed. Miguel stops by a bench along the sidewalk. He sets the bag down at his feet and rubs his shoulder gently. A sigh slips out, unplanned. His body speaks before his mind comes up with anything new. He sits there for a while, watching the few cars that pass by. Each one moves forward and doesn't come back. Only his thoughts keep looping. When he was younger, Miguel once heard a story. A man crossed a river using a boat. After reaching the other side, instead of leaving the boat behind, the man lifted it onto his shoulders and kept walking. Everyone who saw him thought it looked heavy. But the man carrying the boat said, "I need it. You never know, there might be another river ahead." Back then, Miguel laughed. But tonight, sitting on the cold bench, the story feels strangely familiar. Not because he's carrying an actual boat, but because he's carrying things that have already done their job. The conversation in the kitchen helped him react quickly in the moment. The worry helped him be more careful. The replaying and rethinking once helped him avoid mistakes. But that river has already been crossed, and he's still carrying everything on his shoulders, as if setting it down would mean losing something important. Miguel bends down and opens the canvas bag. He rearranges a few items, even though nothing is really out of place. The movement is simple, unhurried. The soft rustle of fabric is barely audible. And in that moment, the thoughts in his head slow down too. They don't disappear. They just stop crowding each other. Some habits are hard to let go of, not because they're bad, but because they once helped us. We get used to keeping everything just in case, holding on to words we said, small mistakes, all the what-ifs, like carrying the boat simply because we're afraid there might be another river ahead. Miguel closes the bag. This time, instead of putting it back on his shoulder right away, he leaves it on the bench. His shoulders drop slightly on their own. Not much, but enough for him to notice the difference. This lightness doesn't come from life suddenly being easier. It comes from no longer forcing himself to carry more than he needs. He doesn't promise himself that he'll never overthink again. He doesn't set a goal to let go perfectly. He just notices that maybe he doesn't need to carry everything right now. Miguel stands up and lifts the bag onto his shoulder again. But this time he adjusts the strap so it sits more comfortably. Not too tight, not too loose, just enough to keep moving. The road home is still there, but his shoulders feel lighter than they did a moment ago. If you're listening to this and recognize yourself in the habit of carrying things that are already over, that's okay. You don't have to throw them away right now. Just ask gently, do I still need this for this part of the road? The answer might not come right away, but even asking the question is already a step onto the other shore. Miguel continues walking home. The familiar street, the familiar houses, windows glowing or dark in different ways, nothing new. And yet something inside him feels slightly different, as if something has been set down, even though he can't quite name what it is. The bag is still on his shoulder. It hasn't disappeared. But it no longer feels like it's pulling him backward. Each step feels lighter, not because the distance has shortened, but because he's no longer carrying the repeated thoughts from the shift that just ended. There are moments when things are happening that we need to hold on tightly. We have to remember details. Think ahead, react quickly. But once those moments are over, continuing to grip them only makes us more tired. Like a boat that helped us cross a river, useful then. But once the water is behind us, it becomes nothing more than weight on our shoulders. Miguel stops at his front door. He stands there for a moment, his hand resting on the doorknob, not rushing to open it. Inside, it's quiet. No one is waiting for an explanation. No one is asking whether he did a good job today. No one needs him to think any further. He opens the door, steps inside, and closes it softly behind him. The room is dimmer than the street outside. Only a small light glows in the kitchen corner. Miguel sets the bag down on a chair this time, not keeping it close to him, just placing it there like something that has finished what it was meant to do. He washes his hands at the sink. The water runs steadily, neither hot nor cold. The sound of it covers everything else. As he washes, he notices his hands feel more tired than usual. Not from heavy work, but from gripping for too long. As he rubs in the soap, his fingers loosen on their own, little by little. A thought appears, I should have said that differently. Then another follows. But this time he doesn't chase them. He doesn't argue. He doesn't try to fix them. He simply notices them arrive and lets the sound of the water carry them away. Not because he's especially good at letting go, just because right now he doesn't need to carry them with him. Miguel dries his hands, turns off the kitchen light, and walks toward the bedroom. He doesn't turn on the main light, just enough to see where he's going. When he sits on the edge of the bed, he feels the mattress take his weight. No effort needed, no balance to maintain, nothing else required of him. Some nights, you don't need to figure out a new way to live. You just need to give yourself permission to stop carrying things that have already done their job. Old words, small mistakes, situations that have already closed. They don't vanish. But you don't have to bring them with you everywhere. Miguel lies down. He doesn't adjust the pillow over and over. He doesn't search for the perfect position. He just lies there like someone who has finished the day's walk. His breathing slows naturally. No counting, no instructions, just following his body. If you're still listening right now, still awake, that's okay. There's nothing being asked of you. You don't need to let go of everything. You don't need to set it all down at once. You only need to stop carrying more. Maybe tomorrow you'll need that boat again. You'll need to think. You'll need to be careful. And that's completely fine. But tonight, with no river in front of you, you can let it rest on the shore. Miguel closes his eyes, not to force sleep, but because his eyelids have grown heavy on their own. In the quiet room, there's nothing to solve, nothing to prove. Just a day that has passed and a body that's allowed to rest. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this story, that's perfectly natural. And if you haven't yet, you're still exactly where you need to be. Nothing is late. Nothing has gone wrong. It's just an ordinary evening, and you don't need to carry the whole day into your sleep. Listen a little longer, or fall asleep now if you'd like. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.